Hello, Pack. A bond can break in 100 ways. Some of them are loud, a declaration, a door, a name spoken in front of witnesses. Some of them are quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a room like water filling a hold, slow and inevitable, until the thing you thought was solid is simply gone. Sable felt hers go while she was counting stitches. She was in the infirmary of Ironhold, 3 weeks into her post as the Pack's contract healer, and the man on her table was the king's head guard, a wolf named Bren, who had taken a rogue's blade across his ribs. She had her hands in the wound. She was counting. 7, 8, 9. And somewhere between 8 and 9, the thing she had carried for 4 years, that low, persistent warmth that lived just behind her sternum, that she had told herself was habit and not hope, went flat, not painful, not dramatic, just gone. She finished the stitches, then she packed her kit, then she left. Kaelen of Ironhold would not understand what had happened for another 6 hours. By then, the trail was cold, the gate wolves were confused, and his bond, the one he had been suppressing for 4 years, with the particular discipline of a man who had learned that wanting things was a liability, had gone silent in a way that felt nothing like peace. This is a story about what it costs to let a thread pull thin for too long, and what it takes to find the person on the other end of it when they have decided reasonably and with full evidence that you are not worth waiting for. Let's begin. Sable had come to Ironhold the way she came to most places, through a letter she almost didn't answer. The Pack's previous healer had retired south after 30 years of service, and the council had sent inquiries to 3 practitioners. 2 had declined. Sable had accepted because the fee was fair. The contract was 6 weeks, and she had been in the Marsh Cottage region for 3 months, and was running low on both wolfsbane antidote stock and reasons to stay. She had a reputation across 4 territories as someone who could be trusted with difficult cases and difficult packs. She had a smaller, quieter reputation as someone who did not stay. She arrived in the 3rd week of autumn, when the frost had just begun to settle on the high pine country around the fortress. Her cart was practical. A single horse, a covered bed packed with her father's bone-handled medical kit, and 3 cases of her own compounded medicines, a bedroll, and a change of clothes. She had no escort. She had not asked for one. The gate wolves met her at the outer wall. There were 2 of them, large and gray, and they had been stationed at that post long enough that they knew every face in the Pack, and most of the faces that came to the Pack. They did not know hers. They stepped forward with the particular efficiency of wolves who had done this 1,000 times, and then they stopped. The first one lowered its head. Sable noticed it the way she noticed most things, clinically, with the part of her brain that catalogued and filed. A gate wolf dipping its head to an arriving stranger was not standard. She filed it away without knowing why. The second wolf followed, slower, as if it was working something out. She drove through the gate. The courtyard was busy with the ordinary business of a fortress in autumn. Wood being stacked, horses being walked, a group of younger wolves running drills near the far wall. The activity did not stop exactly, but it slowed, not all at once, in a ripple, starting from the gate and moving outward, like a stone dropped in still water. Heads turned, hands paused. A woman carrying a basket of linen stopped walking and stood very still, watching Sable's cart cross the cobblestones. Sable climbed down, tied the horse, and began unloading her cases. She was on the 2nd case when she became aware that she was being watched from the upper gallery. She did not look up immediately. She finished lifting the case, set it on the cart's edge, and then looked. A man stood at the gallery rail. He was tall, dark-coated, and still in the way that suggested the stillness was a choice rather than an absence of motion. He was watching her with an expression she could not read from that distance, not because it was hidden, but because it was so carefully composed that it offered nothing to read. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her case and carried it toward the infirmary door that a wide-eyed young stable hand had just pointed her toward. She had a job to do. She met the council on her second day. There were 4 of them. Elder Voss, who ran the administrative side of the pack with the smooth efficiency of a man who had been doing it for decades. Councillor Fenn, who had the careful enunciation of someone who chose words as weapons. A woman named Aldous, who oversaw the pack's trade agreements and who looked at Sable with the particular assessment of someone pricing a commodity. And the 4th, who sat at the end of the table and said very little. Kaelen of Ironhold was younger than she had expected for a king. Not young. There were years in his face, in the set of his jaw, in the way he carried his shoulders, but younger than the weight of the title suggested. He had gray eyes, the kind that went quieter rather than harder when he was thinking, and he had not looked at her directly since she entered the room. He looked at her once, when Elder Voss introduced her by name. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. Then he looked back at the table. The meeting was brief and procedural. Her contract was confirmed. Her access to the infirmary stores was granted. She was given a room in the healer's quarters, adjacent to the infirmary, which suited her. She was told that the pack's previous healer had kept records that she was welcome to review, and that Bren, the head guard, had a standing appointment for a shoulder injury that hadn't healed cleanly from a summer raid. She said she would see to it. Kaelen said nothing. He was already reading something when she left. She noticed that too, filed it away. The shoulder turned out to be a deeper problem than the previous healer had documented. Bren was a large, quiet wolf who submitted to examination with the resigned patience of a man who had been told too many times that something would heal on its own. Sable probed the scar tissue, asked him to rotate the joint, watched his jaw tighten, and told him that the original stitching had caught a muscle wrong, and that she would need to release it under a local numbing compound. He said that was fine. She said it would hurt. He said he had noticed. She liked him immediately, the way you like someone who doesn't perform toughness but simply has it. She worked carefully, and he held still, and afterward he told her that the previous healer had been a good man, but had been afraid of Kaelen. She asked why. Bren looked at her with the mild expression of someone deciding how much to say. He's not easy to read, he said. People find that unsettling. I find unreadable patients easier, she said. They don't tell me what they think is wrong with them. Bren almost smiled. I'll tell the king you said that. Please don't, she said, and meant it. But something in the exchange settled in her chest in a way she didn't examine. She was good at not examining things. On the 4th day, Kaelen came to the infirmary. He did not knock. His footsteps stopped outside the door, and then the door opened, and he stood in the frame for a moment as if he was giving the room time to adjust to him. It was an unconscious thing, she thought, the particular habit of a man who had spent long enough commanding space that he no longer noticed he was doing it. She was compounding a tincture at the work table. She did not stop. Bren says his shoulder is better, he said. It will be worse before it's better, she said. The muscle needs time to relearn the joint. He should avoid overhead work for another 10 days. He won't like that. I'm not here to be liked. A pause. She heard him move into the room, not toward her, but to the side, to the shelf where she had reorganized the infirmary stores. She had done it on her first day. The previous arrangement had been functional but inefficient, and she had a system. You moved things, he said. I did. The previous arrangement had the wolfsbane antidotes behind the general compounds. That's a sequencing problem in an emergency. Another pause. She heard him pick something up and set it back down. The previous healer had been here for 30 years, he said. Not a complaint, an observation. Then he had 30 years of a sequencing problem, she said. I'm sorry if that's inconvenient. She heard something that might have been the beginning of a sound. Not quite a laugh, but close enough. It didn't develop into anything. She heard him cross back toward the door. 6 weeks, he said. She looked up then. He was at the door, one hand on the frame, and he was looking at her with those gray eyes that had gone very quiet. That's the contract, she said. He nodded once. Flat and final. No explanation offered, none needed. And he left. She stood at the work table for a moment after the door closed, her hands still over the tincture. Then she went back to work. She did not think about the way he had said it. She was very careful not to think about it. The infirmary had a small attached room that Sable used as a study in the evenings. A table, a lamp, the previous healer's records stacked in careful order. She had been working through them methodically, building a picture of the pack's medical history, noting patterns. It was the kind of work that required attention and gave the mind something to hold on to, which was why she did it in the evenings when the fortress went quiet. On the 6th day, she was deep in a record from 8 years back, a difficult winter, a fever that had moved through the pack's children, when she became aware that someone was in the corridor outside, not moving, just present. She waited. The footsteps did not continue. They did not retreat. They simply stopped, the way footsteps stop when someone has reached a door and is deciding. She did not call out. She turned a page. After a long moment, the footsteps moved away. She sat with that for a while. Then she filed it away and went back to the records. She had learned, over years of working in other people's territories, to read the emotional temperature of a pack through its small behaviors. How the wolves moved in the corridors, loose or tight, at ease or braced. Whether the kitchen staff talked during meals or ate in silence. Whether the children ran in the courtyards or stayed close to the walls. Ironhold's pack was careful. Not frightened. There was a difference, and she knew it well enough to read it. They were careful in the way of people who trusted their king, but had learned that the king's stillness meant something, and that something was not always comfortable to be near. They were also, she noticed, watching her, not with hostility, with the particular attention of a pack that had seen something they did not have a name for and were waiting to see if it would happen again. The gate wolves bowing, the courtyard going still. She had been in territories where she was watched with suspicion, and this was not that. This was something more like waiting. She mentioned it to Bren at his follow-up appointment obliquely. Your pack watches me, she said. Yes, he said. Is that usual for contract workers? He was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was choosing his words. No, he said. She waited. The gate wolves don't bow, he said. In 30 years, I have not seen them bow for a stranger. She pressed the scar tissue along his shoulder, felt it give more easily than it had 3 days ago. And yet, she said. And yet, he agreed. She did not ask what it meant. She knew what it meant. She had spent 4 years knowing what it meant and refusing to look at it directly, the way you can know a fire is burning in the next room and choose to sit in the cold because going toward the warmth requires admitting you were cold. She had a bond. She had had it since she was 22. when she had been passing through a border market 2 days' ride from Ironhold and had felt something catch in her chest like a hook, sudden and clean and impossible to explain. She had been carrying a crate of medicines. She had stopped walking. She had stood in the middle of the market road for long enough that someone had asked if she was all right. She had said yes. She had kept walking. She had not known whose it was. She had not gone looking. She had told herself it was a sympathetic response. Some wolves experienced echoes of nearby bonds. She knew the literature. It was documented. She had filed it under unlikely and moved on, but it had stayed. A low warmth, persistent, directional, always pointing, if she was honest, roughly northeast. Ironhold was northeast. She had accepted the contract without examining that. She was very good at not examining things. On the 8th day, Kaelen came to the infirmary again. This time he knocked. One knock, which was technically a knock, but was so brief it barely qualified. She said, "Come in," and he did, and he was carrying a file of papers that he set on the table near the door. "The pack's injury records from the last 2 years, Iton," he said. "Bren thought you'd want them." Bren was right, she said. She was wrapping a younger wolf's sprained wrist and did not look up. "You can leave them there." He did not leave. She finished the wrapping, told the young wolf to keep it elevated and come back in 3 days, and waited for him to go. He went, eventually, with a slightly dazzled expression that she had seen on a number of the pack's younger members when they came to the infirmary and found the king already there. Kaelen was still in the room. He had moved to the window. He was looking out at the courtyard, one hand flat on the stone sill, and the line of his back was the particular line of a man who had something to say and was deciding whether to say it. She began organizing the new files. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked. 6 years, she said, "since my training." "Where did you train?" "The Ashgate Order. 3 years." A pause. "That's rigorous," he said. "It was," she agreed. "You could have taken a permanent post. Several packs would have offered one." She looked up at that. He was still looking out the window, but his head had turned slightly, just enough that she could see the line of his jaw. "Several did," she said. "And you didn't take them?" "No." "Why?" She set down the file she was holding. She looked at him for a moment, at the careful stillness of him, the deliberate composition of a man who had learned to hold himself like a question with no answer. "I hadn't found the right one yet," she said. The silence stretched. He turned from the window then, and he looked at her directly for the first time in 8 days, and his gray eyes were very quiet. Not blank. Quiet. The difference between an empty room and a room where someone is very still. She held that look for 3 seconds. Then she picked up the file and went back to work. He left without saying anything else. She counted her stitching needles that evening. All 12 present. She counted them again. She was not sleeping well. The bond was behaving strangely. It had always been low and steady, a background frequency, something she could tune out with effort and attention. But since she had arrived at Ironhold, it had changed. Not louder exactly, more present. The way a sound you've been ignoring becomes impossible to ignore once you've named it. She lay in the healer's quarters and felt it pointing, as it always did, northeast, except that northeast was now 30 feet away, through 2 stone walls, and that was a different thing entirely from northeast being a general direction in the world. She thought about the way he had said, 6 weeks, the way his expression had shifted, just a fraction, when he heard her name, the footsteps that had stopped outside her door and not knocked. She thought about the gate wolves bowing, the courtyard going still. She thought about the bond she had been carrying for 4 years, and the man who had apparently been carrying the other end of it, and had also, apparently, been doing nothing about it. She was not angry. She was not sure what she was. She counted to 12 and went to sleep. Bren came in on the 10th day with a rogue's blade in his ribs. It was not a deep wound, deep enough, but not fatal if she worked quickly. He had been on border patrol and had come back through the gate half supported by 2 of his wolves, his face the particular gray of a man holding himself upright through discipline rather than capacity. She had the table cleared and him on it before the escorting wolves had finished explaining what had happened. She worked. This was what she was good at, the clean, focused mechanics of emergency medicine, where everything else fell away and there was only the wound and the work. She had her father's kit open, her compounds ready, her hands moving in the sequence she had practiced until it was reflex. Bren was conscious and held still with the same resigned patience he brought to everything. "Count with me," she said. "What?" he said. "It helps. Count." He counted. She stitched. 7, 8, 9. And between 8 and 9, without warning, without ceremony, the warmth behind her sternum went flat. She did not stop. Her hands did not shake. She completed the stitch, pulled the thread, moved to 10. Her mind registered what had happened with the same clinical detachment she brought to everything. A bond tearing was a documented phenomenon. She knew the literature. It was associated with prolonged distance, with deliberate suppression, with the kind of sustained refusal that wore a thread thin until it simply gave. She finished the stitches, 12 of them, all even. She tied off the thread, cleaned the wound, applied the compound, and bandaged it with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned that hands that keep moving don't shake. "Good," she told Bren. "Stay still for an hour. Don't try to sit up." He looked at her. He had been watching her face, she realized, for the last several minutes. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," she said. "You're the one with stitches." She cleaned her instruments. She organized her kit. She washed her hands at the basin, dried them, and stood at the window for a moment looking out at the courtyard where the autumn light was going thin and gold across the cobblestones. Then she went to her room. She packed the way she had packed 100 times, efficiently, without sentiment. The medical kit, the compounds, the change of clothes, the records she had been working through she left stacked on the study table in order, with a note detailing the most urgent cases and her treatment recommendations. She had been here 10 days. She had treated 14 patients. She had done the job she was contracted to do, and she would write to the council from the next town and explain that a family matter had required her early departure and that she would return the unused portion of her fee. She did not write a note to Kaelen. There was nothing to say. She used the servants' passage to reach the outer courtyard. She knew it from the architectural plan she had studied on her second day, because she always studied the architectural plan, because she always knew where the exits were. The night gate was attended by a single wolf who was young enough to be uncertain about protocol and old enough to know that the healer leaving at midnight with her horse and her cases was not standard. She gave him her name and her contract number and told him she had an emergency call from a neighboring territory. He let her through. She rode northeast for an hour before she turned south. She did not look back. Kaelen felt it at 6 in the morning. He had been awake since 4. He was often awake since 4, which was one of the things he had learned to live with. He had been at the window of his study, which faced the inner courtyard, and he had been doing what he did most mornings at that hour, which was standing very still and not thinking about anything in particular. And then the thing he had been suppressing for 4 years, the low, steady warmth that he had told himself was an anomaly, a misfire, a sympathetic response documented in the literature, went silent. He had been suppressing it so thoroughly for so long that he almost did not recognize the difference between the warmth and its absence. Almost. But there was a quality to the silence that was nothing like the silence he had been manufacturing. The silence he had been manufacturing was effortful. This was absolute. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he went to the infirmary. The room was clean and ordered. The instruments were in their places. The stores were arranged in the sequence she had established, wolfsbane antidotes in front, where they could be reached in an emergency. The records were stacked on the study table with a note on top. He read the note. He stood in the empty room for a while. Then he went to Bren. Bren was awake, because Bren was always awake when something had gone wrong, and because the pain in his ribs was the kind that made sleep theoretical. He looked at Kaelen standing in the infirmary doorway and said nothing, which was one of the things Kaelen valued most about him. "She's gone," Kaelen said. "I know," Bren said. "When?" "Sometime in the night. Marin at the night gate let her through. She said she had an emergency call." Kaelen was quiet. Bren watched him with the careful attention of a man who had served this king for 11 years and knew the difference between the stillness that meant he was thinking and the stillness that meant he was somewhere else entirely. "She felt it go," Bren said, "while she was stitching me." Kaelen looked at him. "I was watching her face," Bren said. "I didn't know what I was seeing at the time, but I know what it looks like now." The silence stretched. "I suppressed it," Kaelen said. "Not an explanation. A fact, stated with the flatness of a man who has looked at something clearly and found it exactly as bad as he feared." "Yes," Bren said. "For 4 years." "Yes." Kaelen put one hand flat on the door frame. He stood like that for a moment. Not the composed stillness he usually wore, but the stillness of something that had finally stopped bracing and found there was nothing left to brace against. "She finished the stitches," he said. "She did," Bren said. "Every one of them." Kaelen looked at his hand on the door frame. Then he pushed off it and walked back down the corridor. Bren listened to his footsteps go, and then go faster, and then heard the sound of the king calling for his horse. The trail was cold. She had 6 hours on him, and she had not gone northeast. The scouts he sent northeast came back with nothing by midday. She had not gone to any of the 3 neighboring territories that might have offered her a contract. She had not gone to Ashgate, where she had trained. She had not, as far as anyone could determine, gone anywhere that made obvious sense. She had simply gone. He rode the southern road himself, which was not something the Alpha King of Ironhold typically did. Ride alone down a trade road in the gray morning with his jaw set and his eyes scanning every cart track and side path. His wolves ran the tree line on either side. They were unsettled in the way that wolves are unsettled when the pack's emotional temperature is wrong, ranging further than usual, doubling back, refusing to settle into the ordinary rhythm of a patrol. They had felt it too, the bond going quiet. He had not understood until now how much of his suppression had been bleeding through to the pack, how the thing he had been holding down had been felt as a kind of pressure, and now that it was gone, the absence was its own pressure. He rode until dark and found nothing. He came back to Ironhold and stood in the infirmary for a long time, in the clean and ordered room that smelled of her compounds, and he thought about 4 years of a thread pulled thin. He had known. That was the part he could not get past. He had known from the first moment, from the letter that came through the council's hiring process, from the name on the contract, from the way his chest had done something involuntary when he read it. He had known when she arrived and the gate wolves bowed. He had known in the infirmary when she told him she hadn't found the right post yet, and the way she had looked at him when she said it, and the way he had left without answering. He had been suppressing it for 4 years because the last time he had let himself want something, it had cost the pack a border raid and 3 lives, and his first mate's departure north without a word. He had decided, with the particular logic of a man who has been badly burned, that the thing to do was not to want things, that control was the same as safety. He understood now that control was not the same as safety. Control was just a way of making sure that when something finally broke, it broke alone. He sent 3 more sets of scouts over the following days. He sent inquiries to the Ashgate Order. He wrote to the councils of 4 neighboring territories, asking if a traveling healer had passed through. He got answers back eventually. She had passed through Greymere 2 days south. She had treated a child with a fever and moved on. She had passed through the market town of Colt 4 days south. She had restocked her medicines and moved on. The trail was consistent and unhelpful. She was moving. She was working. She was not stopping. He sat with that for a week. Then he went to find her himself. He found her in a small pack settlement 3 weeks south of Ironhold, in the Marsh Cottage region, which was where she had been before she came to him. She was not hiding. She was in the settlement's common hall, visible through the window, sitting at a table with a young mother and a newborn, and a set of instruments laid out with the particular efficiency he had spent 10 days watching. He stood outside the window for a long time. She looked up once, not at the window, at something across the room, a sound or a movement. Her profile was familiar in a way that made his chest do the involuntary thing it had been doing since the first time he read her name on a contract. She looked well. She looked composed. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was living inside it with the same clean practicality she brought to everything. He went inside. She heard the door and did not look up. She was finishing something with the newborn, a small adjustment, a check of the breathing. She said something quiet to the mother, who nodded and gathered the child. Then she began cleaning her instruments, and she said, without turning around, "I'll be with you in a moment." He waited. She turned around. She looked at him for a long moment. Her expression did not change dramatically. She was not a woman given to dramatic changes of expression. But something went very still in her face, the kind of stillness that is the opposite of calm. "Kaelen," she said. "Sable," he said. The silence stretched. The young mother, sensing something, gathered her things and left with a murmured thank you. The door closed behind her. They were alone in the common hall with the low fire and the instruments and the particular weight of 3 weeks of distance and 4 years before that. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "I know," he said. "The bond is gone," she said. "You felt it go." "Yes." "Then there's nothing to come for." He looked at her. She was standing with her hands at her sides, her instruments half cleaned on the table, and she was watching him with the expression of a woman who had made her decision and was waiting to see if he was going to try to unmake it for her. "I want to explain," he said. "You don't owe me an explanation," she said. "We were strangers. The bond was. It was an accident of proximity, or timing, or whatever it is. You didn't do anything wrong." "I did," he said. "And you know I did. You wouldn't have left at midnight if you didn't know I did." She was quiet. He crossed the room, not toward her, but to the table, and he put his hands flat on it and looked down at them. She watched him. He had, she noticed, the same quality of stillness he had always had, but it was different now, not composed, not controlled, the stillness of something that had stopped performing. "My first mate left," he said. 3 years before you came. She was a council match. She stayed 6 months, and then she went north without a word, and I found out 2 days later through a border report. The pack had lost 3 wolves in the raid that summer. I had been so focused on holding the territory that I hadn't. I had been holding the bond down too, the way I held everything down. And when she left, I thought... He stopped, started again. I thought that was what it cost, wanting things. I thought the correct lesson was to stop. She did not say anything. She was watching him with the careful attention of a woman who had learned to let people finish. And then your name came through on a contract, he said, and something happened in my chest that I hadn't felt in 3 years, and I decided that the correct response was to suppress it. Because I knew what happened when I didn't, because the pack couldn't afford another. He stopped again. You were protecting the pack, she said. Flat, not a question. I was protecting myself, he said, and calling it the same thing. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. She looked at him for a long time, at his hands flat on the table, at the line of his shoulders, at the gray eyes that had gone quieter than she had ever seen them. The bond is gone, she said again, quieter this time. I know. You can't... She stopped, pressed her lips together. You can't rebuild a bond that's torn. That's not how it works. I know that too. Then what are you here for? He looked up at her then. To tell you the truth, he said, because you left without knowing it, and you deserved to know it. Not so you'd come back, not so anything would be different. Just because you spent 4 years carrying the other end of something I was refusing to look at, and you deserved to know that I knew, and that I was wrong, and that it was not because you weren't worth it. She stood very still. It was because I was afraid, he said, flat and final. That's the whole of it. She looked at him for a long time. The fire had burned low in the grate. Outside, the marsh was going gray with evening. She had her instruments on the table and her kit packed by the door, and 3 weeks of distance between herself and the place where she had felt the bond go, and she was standing in a common hall in the Marsh Cottage region, looking at a man who had ridden 3 weeks south to tell her the truth when he didn't have to. The bond is gone, she said for the 3rd time. Yes, he said, but you're here. Yes. Why? Because I'm asking, he said, not claiming, not commanding, asking. If there's anything left, any possibility of anything, I want to earn it from the beginning, without the bond, without the obligation, just... He stopped. Something moved in his face. Just you deciding whether I'm worth it. The silence stretched for a long time. She picked up an instrument from the table and finished cleaning it. He watched her. She set it in the kit, picked up another. He did not move. He stood with his hands flat on the table and let her think. And that, the not moving, the not pressing, the particular quality of waiting that was nothing like the waiting he had done for 4 years, was what finally made her stop. She set down the instrument. You rode 3 weeks, she said. Yes. Alone? With 2 wolves. They're outside. She almost smiled. It didn't quite develop. You're the Alpha King of Ironhold, she said. You can't just... I left Bren in charge, he said. He's capable. He has 12 stitches in his ribs. He's very capable. This time the almost smile did develop, briefly, before she pressed it back. She looked at him for another long moment. I'm not coming back to Ironhold, she said. Not on those terms, not as the contract healer. I know, he said. If I came back, it would be... She stopped, started again, more carefully. It would have to be different. Yes, he said. I would need to know that you're not going to... She stopped again. Suppress it, he said. Yes. He looked at her steadily. I have ridden 3 weeks south to tell you that I was wrong and ask you to consider a possibility that I have no right to ask for, he said. I don't think suppression is the risk anymore. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You'd better stay the night. It's dark, and the marsh road is bad after dark. He did not move for a moment, as if he was making sure he had heard correctly. Then he nodded once, the particular nod of a man who understands that this is not a yes, and is grateful for it anyway. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. I'm going to ask you a great deal of questions. I know, he said, and I'm going to finish cleaning my instruments. I'll wait, he said. She picked up the instrument she had set down. She cleaned it and set it in the kit and picked up the next one. He stood at the table and watched and did not say anything, and the fire burned low, and outside the marsh went fully dark. She asked him questions for 3 hours. Not soft questions, not the kind of questions that were really just invitations to say more, the kind of questions that required answers, that had follow-ups, that circled back to check consistency. She asked about the border raid and what he had decided afterward. She asked about the political match and whether he had chosen it or accepted it. She asked about the 4 years of suppression, specifically what he had told himself about it, what the internal logic had been, whether he had believed it. He answered. All of it. Flat and final. No excuses offered. Each word picked up and examined before being set down. She asked about the footsteps in the corridor on the 6th night. He was quiet for a moment. I came to knock, he said. I decided not to. Why? Because I didn't know what I would say if you answered. And now? He looked at her across the table. Now I know that not saying it was worse, he said. She nodded, filed it away. She asked about the council, whether they knew about the bond, whether they would have opinions about a contract healer, whether there were political complications she needed to understand before she made any decisions. He said yes, the council knew. He said Councillor Fenn would have opinions and that Elder Voss would manage them. He said Aldous would come around when she understood the practical implications. She asked what the practical implications were. He said that a mate bond, named and recognized, carried weight in pack law, that a healer with a named bond to the Alpha King was not a contract worker, that the pack's response to her arrival, the gate wolves, the courtyard, all of it, had been, in its way, the pack's recognition before either of them had named anything. She was quiet for a while after that. The bond is gone, she said, for the 4th time, but this time it was different. Not a statement of finality, but a question. The bond as it was is gone, he said. Yes. But you're here. Yes. And you're asking. Yes. She looked at the fire. It had burned very low. She had not rebuilt it, and he had not offered to. He had understood, she thought, that it was her fire to rebuild or not. She got up and put 2 pieces of wood on the grate. She came back to the table and sat down. I'll come back to Ironhold, she said, not as the contract healer, not on a 6-week term. He was very still. I'll come back, she said, and we'll see if there's something to build. Without the bond, without the obligation. Just, she borrowed his word back to him, just you and me deciding whether it's worth it. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. But it was the most unguarded thing she had seen on his face, and she filed it away carefully, in a different part of her mind than the clinical catalogue, the part that was not very good at not examining things. All right, he said. I have 2 patients here I need to see through, she said. I'll be ready in 4 days. I'll wait, he said. You don't have to wait here. she said. You can go back and I'll follow. I'll wait, he said again. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. He slept in the settlement's guest room, which was small and cold and had a window that faced the marsh. She slept in the healer's quarters, which was smaller and colder. The fire she had rebuilt burned through the night. She was not counting stitching needles. She slept well, for the first time in 3 weeks. They rode back to Ironhold on the 5th day. She had needed the extra day for the second patient, a difficult delivery that had required her full attention and had gone well in the end, mother and child both healthy. He had waited without complaint and had, she noticed, spent the time usefully, helping with the settlement's firewood, which was low, and with a fence repair that the settlement's elder had mentioned in passing. He did not make a production of it. He simply did it, the way a man does things when he has somewhere to put his hands. She noticed that, too. The road back was long and mostly quiet, which suited them both. They talked, when they talked, about practical things, the pack's medical history, the cases she had left notes on, Bren's recovery. He told her that Bren had, in fact, been managing from the infirmary table with the record she had left, which she found both predictable and deeply satisfying. On the 3rd day of riding, in the high pine country where the frost had deepened since she left, he told her about his first mate without her asking. Not the political facts, she knew those, but the texture of it, the 6 months, what he had understood about himself afterward, what he had decided, and why and where the logic had broken down. She listened. She did not offer comfort or contradiction. When he finished, she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "You made a reasonable decision with bad premises." He looked at her. "You decided that wanting things cost the pack," she said. "That was the premise. But the thing that cost the pack was the border raid, and the raid happened because you were trying to hold everything alone. The wanting had nothing to do with it." He was quiet for a long time. "I know that now," he said. "You knew it before," she said. "You just couldn't feel it." He did not answer that, but something in his expression shifted, the particular shift of a man who has been told a true thing by someone who had no reason to soften it. They rode the rest of the day in silence that was not uncomfortable. Ironhold appeared on the morning of the 4th day, gray and stone against the frost-white sky. The fortress solid and permanent on its rise above the high pine country. She had not seen it from this angle before. She had arrived from the east, through the forest road. From the south it looked different, older, more itself. She pulled up her horse for a moment and looked at it. He pulled up beside her. "It's larger than I thought," she said. "It's older than it looks," he said. "The inner walls are 300 years. The outer ones are newer." "Which parts are yours?" He considered that. "The library," he said. "The east corridor. The infirmary, apparently, since you reorganized it." She looked at him. He was looking at the fortress with the expression of a man who has lived in a place so long he has stopped seeing it, and is seeing it again now through someone else's eyes. "It suits you," she said. "Does it?" "The stone," she said. "The permanence. Yes." He was quiet. Then, "You don't stay in places." "I haven't," she said. "That's different." He looked at her. "I haven't found the right one," she said. And this time she said it looking at him directly, not at a tincture on a work table. And the thing she had said obliquely 8 days into her first stay she was saying plainly now, with the particular clarity of a woman who had decided that not saying things was worse. He held her gaze for a moment. "Come home," he said, not a command, the quietest thing she had ever heard him say. She looked at Ironhold for another moment. Then she clicked her horse forward. They rode through the gate together. The gate wolves were there, both of them, the two large gray wolves who had met her on her first arrival. They stepped forward with the efficiency of wolves who knew their post, and then they stopped, and the first one lowered its head, and the second followed. She did not file it away this time. Bren was in the courtyard, upright despite the 12 stitches, leaning against the wall with the resigned patience of a man who had been waiting and was not going to say so. He looked at Sable. He looked at Kaelen. He looked at the gate wolves. "Welcome back," he said to Sable. "How are the ribs?" she said. "Manageable. I'll look at them this afternoon." "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. She climbed down from her horse and handed the reins to the stable hand who appeared, and she stood in the courtyard of Ironhold for a moment, with the frost on the cobblestones and the high pine country visible beyond the walls, and the pack's activity slowing in that ripple she had seen on her first day. Heads turning, hands pausing, the particular attention of a pack that had been waiting. Kaelen stood beside her, not in front of her, beside. She looked at the pack looking at her. "They'll have questions," she said. "Yes," he said. "The council will have more. Fen will have the most," he said. "Voss will manage him. And Aldous will come around," he said, "when she understands the practical implications." She almost smiled. "You said that before. It's still true." She looked at the courtyard, at the wolves who had gone still, at the young stable hand watching with wide eyes, at Bren against the wall pretending not to look pleased. She looked at the fortress walls, gray and old and permanent. She looked at the frost on the cobblestones. "I'll need my old room back," she said, "the one adjacent to the infirmary." "It hasn't been touched," he said, "and I'll need a key to the stores. You'll have one. And I'm going to reorganize the library." A pause. "The library?" "The medical texts are shelved by title," she said. "That's a sequencing problem." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man deciding whether to argue and deciding not to. "All right," he said. "And I will not," she said, "be called the contract healer." "No," he said, "you won't." She looked at him. He was watching her with the gray eyes that had gone quieter than she had ever seen them. Not the controlled quiet of the composed man she had met in a council room, but the quiet of something that had finally stopped working so hard at being still. "We're starting from the beginning," she said. "No bond obligation, no pack pressure, just us deciding," he said. "Yes." "I know," he said. "I'm asking." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and picked up her kit from the cart and walked toward the infirmary door. She stopped at the threshold. "Kaelen," she said. "Yes," he said. "You were worth it," she said. "For the record, that was never the question." She went inside. He stood in the courtyard for a moment, with the frost on the cobblestones, and the pack watching, and the gate wolves still at their post. And something moved in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was the particular shape of a man who has been handed something he knows he has to be careful with. Then he followed her inside. The council meeting happened 3 days later. Fen had the most questions, as predicted. He had them in a particular order, each one carefully enunciated, each one designed to establish that the council's authority over matters of pack bond and territorial alliance had not been superseded by the king's unilateral decision to ride south and return with a woman whose contract had technically expired. Sable sat at the table and let him finish. Then she said, "Councillor Fen, I understand your concern. The bond that existed between myself and the king was unnamed and has since dissipated. I am here under no bond obligation. I am here because the king asked and I agreed. If the council has a formal objection to the king's choice of companion, I'd like to hear it stated plainly." Fen opened his mouth. "Plainly," she said. not procedurally. A silence fell over the table. Elder Voss, she noticed, was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man concealing something that might be satisfaction. Aldous, across the table, was looking at Sable with the particular assessment she had applied on their first meeting, pricing a commodity. And then something shifted in it, a recalibration. The previous bond, Aldous said. It dissipated because it was suppressed. Yes, Sable said. By the king. Yes. Aldous looked at Kaelen. Kaelen met her gaze without deflection. And you are here without the bond's compulsion, Aldous said to Sable. Yes, by choice. By choice, Sable said. Aldous nodded once, slowly, the nod of a woman who has made a calculation. Then the council has no formal objection, she said. Fen looked at her. Aldous, the council has no formal objection, Aldous said again, with a particular finality of a woman who runs trade agreements and knows how to close a negotiation. Fen closed his mouth. Voss lowered his eyes from the ceiling. Kaelen said nothing, but his hand, flat on the table, opened slightly. Not much, just a fraction. And Sable, who had spent 10 days cataloging his tells, filed it away in the part of her mind that was no longer pretending not to examine things. They named it on the first frost of winter. Not the bond. The bond was gone, and they had both understood by then that what was being built was not a reconstruction but a new thing, slower and more deliberate and more chosen than a bond had ever required them to be. What they named was simpler, a declaration before witnesses in the courtyard of Ironhold, with the frost white on the cobblestones and the pack assembled in the cold morning air. Kaelen said her name in front of his pack, not as the healer, not as the contract worker, as the person he was asking to stay. She said his name back. The gate wolves, at the edge of the courtyard, lowered their heads. The ripple moved outward, slower than the first time, more deliberate, the kind of recognition that was not instinct but choice. Wolves who had watched her work for weeks, who had come to the infirmary and left steadier, who had seen their king ride south and return with something different in the set of his shoulders. They lowered their heads one by one, and it was not the involuntary response of a bond, but the considered response of a pack that had watched and decided. Bren, at the front of the assembly, was the first. He looked at her with the mild expression of a man who had been watching this, develop from a table in the infirmary, 12 stitches in his ribs, and had never doubted the ending. She looked back at him. Your shoulder, she said. Much better, he said. I'll check it anyway, she said. I know, he said. I was counting on it. That evening the infirmary was quiet. She had seen 4 patients, reorganized the herb stores, and started on the medical texts in the library, which were going to take considerably longer than the stores. She was at the work table when he came in. One knock, this time, a real one. And she said, "Come in," and he did. He stood in the room for a moment, not filling it the way he had the first time, not the composed stillness of a man performing control, just standing in the room she had made her own, with the fire burning at the proper height and the stores in their proper order and the instruments in their case. How was the library? He said. Worse than I thought, she said. Someone shelved the genealogies with the astronomical charts. That would be Voss, he said. He has a theory about the relationship between bloodlines and celestial patterns. He's wrong, she said. Probably, he said. He'll want to discuss it. I'm aware, she said. I'll be ready. He crossed the room and stood beside the work table, not across from her but beside, and he looked at what she was working on, a new set of records, her own system, starting from the day she arrived. You're dating them from the 10th day of autumn, he said. That's when I started, she said. You left on the 10th day, he said. I know, she said. I'm counting from the beginning. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and picked up the pen she had set down, and he looked at it, and he set it back down. I felt it go, he said. When you were stitching Bren, I felt it 6 hours later, but I think I felt something change even then. I just didn't know what it was. She looked at him. What did it feel like? He thought about it. Like going deaf in a room that had always had sound in it, he said, and realizing I'd been hearing it all along. She nodded, filed it away, in the right part, the part that was done pretending. I finished the stitches, she said. I know, he said. 12 of them. I counted them, she said. I know, he said. Bren told me. She looked at the fire. It was burning at the right height. She had rebuilt it when she came in, the way she always rebuilt it when she came in, because a fire that burned low was a fire that went out, and she had learned over 6 weeks and 3 weeks and 5 days, and now the first frost of winter, that the work of keeping something burning was not a burden, but a practice. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I know, he said. But if you go quiet on me, I won't, he said. If you do, she said, I will tell you. I won't just leave. He looked at her. I know, he said. I'll tell you too. The fire burned. Outside, the frost was settling on the cobblestones of the courtyard, white and clean and permanent, the way frost settles on stone that has been there long enough to hold it. She picked up her pen. He sat down in the chair across from her. Not the composed stillness of the Alpha King, not the performed control of a man who had learned that wanting things was a liability. Just a man sitting in a room with a woman who had decided he was worth it, in a fortress that was old enough to hold them both. She went back to her record,